This meeting is being recorded.
Hi, everybody. Hey there. Welcome. I think we are just waiting for Chinasa at the moment. I'm actually just going to leave and come back. It will be just 1 minute.
All right. So everyone, how's it going? Thanks for your patience and awaiting me. I'm going to get my slides set up and then we can start. Oh, wait, hi,
Sure
Jonathan,
thing.
how's it going?
Hi there. Hi, how's it going?
All right.
I don't know if this was asked before, Chinasa. Is it okay if this is recorded?
Oh, yeah, perfectly fine. No problem.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks.
All right.
Fantastic.
Cool.
Okay. I think yeah, that looks perfect. I think we can probably get started then, if that's okay, Chinasa. Yep. So welcome to a joint Shocklab Ethics Lab seminar. We are extremely happy to have Chinasa Okolo here today. So we've been working a little bit over the last few weeks on a couple of articles, and I got to know Chinasa's work only relatively recently, but have been sort of kind of blown away by the depth of thinking and the breadth of what she's been looking at. So Chinasa got her PhD in computer science from Cornell University, is currently a fellow at the Brookings Institute, and has been doing a huge amount of work on policy and governance, as well as historically some of the more technical aspects, in particular looking at issues related to global majority governance and policy aspects. And we are extremely happy to have her here today to talk about broadening perspectives on African governance in the era of AI. So thank you so much for being here.
Great. So thank you for the great introduction, Jonathan, and I'll just get started. And so we've seen that AI development and also efforts towards regulating these systems are really increasingly becoming centralized in Western countries. despite the impacts of AI transcending borders. We know that Western corporations at the frontier of AI development are also largely reliant on the African continent for natural resources like tantalum, cobalt, and tungsten, which form the GPUs that power these large AI models, also known as foundation or frontier models. And also, human resources like data annotation and content moderation labor are used to train and refine these AI systems. Given that Africa is seen as the next frontier for AI development, digital resources like data, which advance the capabilities of AI, will likely become the next commodity that's exploited by foreign entities, fueling a new era of techno-neocolonialism. Globally, when we consider AI progress when it comes to R&D, we see that centralized in countries like the US, China, Canada, the UK, and also the European Union. Despite historical barriers and also present-day challenges, researchers, developers, grassroots organizations, and companies throughout the African continent have begun to make notable progress. In many African countries, and I'm sure you are definitely aware of this, there are grassroots communities that have helped to fill in access and learning capacity gaps of traditional AI and machine learning education. These include Masakane and Ghana NLP, who develop data sets and machine translation tools, alongside with Deep Learning Indaba, which recently happened in Kigali, and also AI Saturdays Lagos and Data Science Africa, who have been instrumental in growing communities of AI researchers and developers within Africa through forming conferences, workshops, and also study groups. Outside of NLP, specialized AI communities have also arisen, focusing on healthcare, like Sisanka Biotique, and also sustainability, like Afri-Climate AI. We've also begun to see a bit more diversity, regional diversity in these communities, particularly in Francophone West Africa, with AI Hub Senegal and Khmer AI Cameroon, and also in Northern Africa, excuse me, with Morocco AI, the Tunisian AI Society, and also Zaire AI in Algeria. AI research labs on the continent have also grown in prominence, particularly through a lot of funding from the AI4D initiative that was mainly funded led by the Canadian International Development Research Centre and also the Swedish International Development Cooperation Agency, alongside with many other partners, of course. Notable academic AI research labs on the continent include many, from the AI and Data Science Research Lab at Makerere in Uganda, the Data Science for Social Impact Lab at the University of Victoria, the AI and Robotics Lab at the University of Lagos, Nigeria, and then also the forthcoming and newly or recently established, UCT AI initiative. And so there's also a growing number of formal degree programs in AI machine learning, like the African Masters in Machine Intelligence that's offered by AIMS, the African Institute for Mathematical Sciences, also an MSc in AI offered by the University of Mauritius, and a Bachelor of Science in AI that's offered by Kumasi Technical University in Ghana. And over the past decade, we've also seen the African AI startup ecosystem expand tremendously. And while estimates on the number of AI startups operating within a continent vary, I've seen anywhere from about 300 to 2,000. We do see that countries with already thriving tech scenes like Nigeria, South Africa, and Egypt have really shown expansive growth in AI. There's also notable activity from emerging entrants into the African AI ecosystem, and this includes countries like Zimbabwe, Cameroon, and also Uganda. And this startup list, this image from startup list is a little bit outdated, but about 85 AI startups on the continent have received cumulative funding of 261 million, with the top 10 startups commanding about 238 million and the top 3, 207. And so InstaDeep, which is a company focusing on decision-making AI systems for biology, logistics, electrical design, and also energy, is the most successful AI startup to come out of Africa, and honestly, one of the most successful startup exits, period, out of the different categories or domains. It was founded in Tunisia in 2014 and acquired by BioNTech, which is a German pharmaceutical company, in 2023 for about 680 million. InstaDeep has more than 400 employees across the world at offices in London, Paris, Berlin, Tunis, Lagos, Cape Town, Boston, and also San Francisco. And we also see that there is a bit of centralization when it comes to where these African AI startups are. And going from the previous market map that I showed earlier, we see that research data from AfriLabs, which is a network organization supporting innovation centers across African countries, and analyzed by Tech Cabal, which is a prominent tech publication within Africa, shows that over 50% of African AI startups are just in 7 countries. And I took this data about, say, like earlier last year, and so I'm not sure if it's been updated since, but I'm sure the stats would probably, mirror what has been shown here. And then also in 2023, I published a co-authored book chapter that was, focused in the Responsible AI in Africa book. And in this chapter, we analyzed 102 African AI startups to understand the problems that they're addressing and also the implications that this has for the wider startup ecosystem. And also, I did this analysis with my co-authors basically in mid 2022 or so. And so this is right before, ChatGPT became a thing. And so I've been wanting to update this chapter, and I'm sure that the ecosystem has changed wildly since then. But again, we did see similar things even, early on in this recent AI revolution. With many African countries, the top ones in terms of tech and talent concentration, also, having this concentration of AI startups as well. And so going into some traditional AI ecosystem challenges, this goes from the root. So when we consider things like infrastructure, education, digital literacy, and also unequal access to ICT resources, this has been a challenge that's impacted the African continent for decades, but also, become even more apparent, turning the digital divide into the AI divide. And so given the large amounts of data that's needed to train AI systems and the high number of computing resources consumed in this process, infrastructure challenges is really a barrier to AI development across different African countries. We see that this limited internet penetration can be largely attributed to infrastructure challenges. And so this includes inadequate access to electricity and also insufficient investments in crucial internet infrastructure. And so this includes fiber optic cables, cellular towers, and also base stations. And more broadly, there are issues with internet access. And within the last decade, from 2011 to 2021, the ITU estimates that internet accessibility within the continent has risen from about 8% to 36%. However, we do see lots of progress in terms of the installation of subsea cables and also fiber optic cables. And this includes initiatives like To Africa, which is the longest subsea internet cable ever designed. It's currently under deployment and has been made a lot of progress over the past couple years, with 46 connections to land-based networks across 33 countries within Africa, Asia, and also Europe. And so building upon infrastructure challenges, we also see that this research from the Oxford Internet Institute shows that AI compute is also unequally distributed globally. Their work classifies countries into 3 categories: the Compute North, where predominantly rich countries host data centers with the latest GPUs for training frontier AI models. We also have the Compute South, which includes predominantly middle-income countries that host older GPUs that are more relevant for deploying and also inferencing AI systems, but not necessarily training them. And then also we have the Cloud Compute Desert, which includes countries that have no AI-specific compute at all. Again, going off some of the similar maps I showed, we continue to see these disparities particularly affect countries within the global majority. And so this includes, Africa, Latin America, the Caribbean, and also in Oceania. And since 2024, the Data Provenance Initiative has conducted a wide-scale audit of datasets used to train AI systems. Their work finds also extreme disparities in global representation in datasets, with about less than 0.2% coming from Africa or South America. As we know, these issues of underrepresentation impact the development of AI systems, leading to bias and also the unequal performance of these tools on global languages, cultures, and value systems. And according to the World Bank, out of all world regions, Sub-Saharan Africa has the lowest percentage of citizens that are equipped with digital skills. And this equals to about half of the average level of digital skills adoption that we see globally. And when we consider how this impacts talent, alongside issues with education, we also see that globally, African countries rank low in their respective concentration and production of AI talent. And this analysis is from Okolo, who shows that there's a high concentration of AI talent within the US and China, with India being one of the notable standouts within the global majority. However, this really interesting work published in Harvard Business Review is actually done a while ago, I think, before, ChatGPT became prominent. And so they show that there are, interesting hotspots that are coming out, across the world. And so this includes within Africa, particularly cities like Johannesburg, Nairobi, and Lagos. And along just more broadly with investing in cloud computing infrastructure, governments in Africa must build the capacity to train local researchers and developers to help expand their respective AI ecosystems. However, given some of the unstable political environments and economies in some regions of Africa, efforts to train and retain AI talent could be hampered if brain drain continues to increase. And I'm sure, again, this is a term that we're all very familiar with. And this work was done in 2021 by Google, and it was their Africa Developer Ecosystem Report. And it estimated that about 38% of African developers worked in Africa at that time for a company with its headquarters based outside of the continent. And I'm sure that this trend has also followed for AI jobs as well. More broadly, it's essential that as AI talent is trained within the countries, that they're encouraged to stay and contribute to local economies through efforts that support local entrepreneurship, research, and also innovation in AI. And so now we'll get into like the sweet spot of the presentation, which goes into a lot of the work that I do at Berkins and also in my personal capacity on AI and data governance in Africa. And so the Carnegie Council for Ethics and International Affairs defines AI governance as a set of rules, regulations, ethical and technical frameworks, and similar mechanisms that guide the development and deployment of AI technologies. Data governance is also an essential aspect of AI governance, as it provides protections over how personal information is collected, stored, and transferred, while also enabling control over information and their right to be informed about data breaches. Given the fundamental role of data in training the machine learning models and also refining them, enacting effective data governance can also enable more comprehensive AI governance. So there's been a lot of interesting work in particularly trackers and maps that have come out over the past couple of years, just aiming to catalog developments in AI governance and regulation. And so we've seen that there's been a lot of progress, particularly in regulating AI over the past couple of years. And this graphic is from Authority Hacker. This is from 2024, and they're breaking down the state of global AI regulation into 4 tiers, basically detailing countries that have enacted regulation, initiated regulatory efforts like strategies, and then also are actively working towards regulation, and also those that have no regulation. We've also seen that the EU more broadly has led these global AI regulatory efforts, with countries in the global majority also making some progress, particularly with Brazil having a recent law on AI that was improved in December 2024. However, we know that only within Africa, there's only one country, which is Rwanda, that has published an AI policy versus a strategy. And so we continue to see the need for a bit more efforts on AI strategies and hopefully AI regulation across Africa. And so when it comes to data governance particularly, I really like this work from ECDPM, which is a European think tank. And so about 38 out of 55 African Union member states, which includes 54 African countries and also the Western Sahara, have enacted formal data protection regulations. About 15 of those were enacted within the last 5 years, and about 26 were enacted in the last decade. The first data protection law in Africa was enacted by Cabo Verde in 2001, and then recent laws include those by Malawi in June 2024, and also Ethiopia in July 2024. And so I have to check on this, but I know that Namibia, South Sudan, and also the Gambia were actually in the process of drafting data protection laws. And so I believe the Gambia may have made a bit more progress than the other two countries in enacting them or getting towards to the Senate stage of those. So we consider, regional efforts or, continental-wide efforts, such as those from the African Union. We do see some progress there, even though the Malabo Convention, also known as the African Union Convention on Cybersecurity and Personal Data Protection, was ratified in June of 2023, 9 years after it was officially adopted. And so this came into force due to the final ratification by Mauritania, which was the 15th country that was needed for ratification to occur. We also see regional efforts, from different regional economic communities, like ECOWAS within Western Africa, the Southern African Development Community, and also the Eastern African Community. However, we do see a bit of gap in terms of this regional coverage, with limited measures proposed by the Arab Maghreb Union, the Community of Sahel-Saharan States, and also the Economic Community of Central African States. And also, we know that there have been a couple countries that left the ECOWAS recently, and so this also continues to show some gaps in coverage for data strategies or policies. And so, at the moment, and this the African Observatory on AI estimates that about 25 out of 55 AU member states have a policy, strategy, plan, or guideline on AI. And so this includes a ministerial or presidential statement or a fully developed strategy document. And so as of about last month, there are about 16 countries actually that have an AI strategy or policy in place, which is a lot more progress than it was last year. And so I think we'll continue to see more progress throughout the year. And then also as the AU continues to lead efforts in AI regulation and governance more broadly. And going into the AU, the Continental AI Strategy, which I actually started work on in June of 2022, so it's been about over 3 years. It aims to provide guidance to African countries to harness the potential, of AI to meet Africa's development aspirations and also the well-being of its people by promoting ethical use, minimizing potential risk, and also leveraging opportunities. The strategy was endorsed last year in Accra, Ghana, from July 18th, in July 18th, during a session that was happening, and then also formally released on August 9th. And I believe it was endorsed earlier this year at the AU the state meeting. And so it's really still working on in terms of what's the next step for implementation and also full ratification by all member states. And so now going into, different implications and some of the challenges that we've seen with AI in Africa, and particularly, those that I think governance would actually be best suited to address. We've seen a lot of benefits or purported benefits of AI, aiming to solve development challenges or fast track, some of these SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. However, we do see many risks across healthcare, employment, policing, even agriculture in a way, and many more domains. However, a lot of the work that examines these risks is really focused on Western context. And so this excludes perspectives on how AI could affect countries in Africa and also the rest of the global majority. We know that African countries are disproportionately acquiring and implementing AI-enabled surveillance technologies, spending over $1 billion a year on contracts with companies in the US, UK, China, the EU, and Israel. In these countries, these technologies have been used to unjustly hold citizens in detention and also track activities of journalists and personal citizens. We've seen a lot of recent coverage on some of the issues around gig work, particularly for data annotators and content moderators, particularly in Kenya, but there's also been a lot of work, within Nigeria and Southern Africa that has, showed the impacts of AI in these respective countries. We see that the lack of robust data protection and also AI policies has exacerbated some of these existing challenges alongside, some outdated labor reforms. And while Africa is not the only region worldwide that lacks AI legislation, African countries have to make a concerted effort to draft AI strategies and also move towards implementing them to protect vulnerable communities and enable responsible innovation. And so there's been a lot of growing discourse on the negative impacts of technologies like generative AI. And I've wrote a bit about this on generated propaganda and disinformation in Africa, with some of my most recent work really focusing particularly on democratic processes like elections. And so to get into disinformation, we see that it's the intentional creation and spread of deliberately deceptive information to mislead or influence people, communities, and institutions. Wasserman and Madrid Morales, authors who did this work in 2019, show that African countries particularly struggle with disinformation, with media consumers in Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa, excuse me, being regularly exposed to disinformation. We see that disinformation have also been fueled by greater access to information through social media and also digital platforms, and further exacerbated by the introduction of generative AI. Elections have been basically, very prominent over the past couple of years, and not just within the US, but also globally. And so, given the recent cascade of generative AI tools, understanding the usage and impact of AI on African elections continues to emerge. There's work that's shown that, African governments are leveraging AI to assist with voter registration, authentication, management, and engagement, along with detecting cyber threats and aiding in oversight and decision making. And despite these more positive use cases, there's been lots of suspected and confirmed cases of AI-generated propaganda. This has influenced electoral outcomes and also even precipitated coups. This underscores a need for comprehensive documentation of generative AI use cases and democratic processes across the continent. And I really enjoy reading lots of articles from the rest of the world. And so you've probably seen a couple references to their work here. And they actually did a lot of good work tracking AI usage in elections globally over the past couple of months and years. And so this report came out in 2024 during the Ghanaian elections and showed that the incumbent political party at the time was using AI to spread misinformation about opposing candidates from the rival party. Even though the rival party actually ended up winning, it's still hard. There were, different accounts spreading these tweets that were often using these AI-generated profile images and also posting between certain periods of the day. And again, the incumbent political party was actually, not successful in gaining another term. And so again, I think it should be interesting to see, how well or how badly, AI-generated propaganda impacts elections and also other democratic processes across Africa. And so this use case right here is really interesting because I tend to talk about it pretty frequently, but also I think it's even more interesting because this happened in December 2018, way before, ChatGPT came out and, DALL-E and other image generators and video generators. And so this is in Gabon, and because there were concerns about the current president's health at the time, this was Ali Bongo, the government released a video, and people noticed that there were unnatural expressions and posture. He wasn't blinking, his mouth wasn't moving correctly, and there were reports that claimed that this actually led, to a coup that happened in January 2019, so just a month later. However, this coup failed, but since then, Gabon has continued to experience instability, and not just, I would say, due to this respective video, but more so the governance, from this political family that's had, strong influence over the country, particularly, since its independence. And then also for Burkina Faso's most recent coup in September 2022, we saw that it was followed by a series of AI-generated videos from American-based Pan-Africanists. And so this appeared to express support for the new military regime. These videos were initially detected on Twitter and Facebook, and then also shared by users who received these videos on WhatsApp. These videos were actually sourced to the generator application Synthesia, and the company actually confirmed that the user was banned, but never revealed their identity. More broadly, we see that generative AI has a strong potential to impact democratic processes, particularly in elections, but also within other, issues around coups and just civic participation more broadly. Within African countries, elections are often plagued by high rates of disinformation, social unrest, internet blackouts, and also ballot tampering. Many of these factors impact civic participation and also, more broadly, undermine democracy. Given that the increasing ubiquity of generative AI heightens concerns, there also has to be, different efforts, by organizations like the AU and also the countries themselves to enact policy measures to prevent some of these negative impacts. Given existing challenges with fragmented policy implementation and also the regulatory environment and enforcement, AI poses a range of challenges for governance in Africa, but also presents a lot of novel opportunities. While current development priorities like refining social services, tackling insecurity, planning for climate change, building infrastructure, and fighting corruption obviously take greater precedence over regulating AI, African governments must concurrently work towards developing robust data and AI regulation. And some of my recent co-authored research shows that African countries face a range of difficulties in meeting their tech potential, and also this impacts policy as well. This includes weak or insufficient data protection regimes, like we notice in Mauritius, complications in achieving robust oversight frameworks to support sustained sector growth in Kenya and Egypt, and then also a limited national priority and also just economic resources to develop specifically to tech and workforce development, as we saw in Angola. There are many different indicators, that could help, improve the AI ecosystem on the continent, but also generally improve AI adoption and development as well. And so these include, strengthening data compute infrastructure, focusing first on electrical grids, and not only, for AI, but specifically just, for improving the well-being of citizens on a daily basis, because we know that there are many benefits that people receive from having constant access to electricity. Also focusing on telecommunications infrastructure and establishing these national and regional computing clusters. Next, it's really important to expand AI education and employment by revamping existing educational systems, improving these formal opportunities for training, particularly through the academic sector, and then also improving, increasing job opportunities for skilled AI and STEM professionals more broadly. When we consider regional and continental cooperation, there's also a big opportunity for countries that don't have the individual capacity to enact or draft regulations to lean on these regional economic communities like ECOWAS, ESC, SADC, and also the African Union for support. And something I'm very passionate about, as a researcher, is accelerating this fundamental AI research. I believe there are a lot of breakthroughs that are still yet to happen because, African researchers and institutions don't have the sufficient resources to develop these AI models from scratch. And so this, provides a reliance on importing these external models and frameworks that may not necessarily align, with the social, cultural, values of African communities and also really the needs of our consumers. And so next, enhancing AI and data governance, something I spoke about throughout the presentation, considering how to systematize these regulatory efforts, preventing duplication and improving pathways for technical professionals to improve, social services, and also more broadly, increase global cooperation on AI. So we've seen a lot of work and efforts from the UN, actually a lot of, announcements yesterday about developing the International Scientific Panel and also the Global Dialogue on AI. And so I think we'll continue to see a lot more progress from these multilateral bodies. And then finally, something I think that's really important and also really understudied or, underacted on in the African context is just trying to understand how to increase this public engagement in AI, and particularly, from those that are, let's say, not necessarily AI specialists, but just generally, teachers, nurses, students, for example, factory workers, farmers, and just having them, um, be able to contribute equitably to these framework developments and also policy implementation for AI, but also other domains more broadly. And so I'm also very, particular about this information because it has a strong impact regardless, and even before AI became prominently used to, increase its spread. And so this work is, from the Africa Center for Strategic Studies, and they've done a lot of work mapping disinformation. I'm showing that they're really about like two main actors, Russia and China, with Russia having a very strong influence. And so there need to be policy measures that focus on disinformation outright, and then also, improve ways to, create techniques that focus on AI generated disinformation, and also, focus on engaging citizens and just literacy efforts to ensure that, they can be aware of these issues, but also, that these disinformation campaigns can be stopped at the source. And then I'm really, also passionate about the, digital ministries within Africa. On the top is the ICT minister for Rwanda. She's been, Holly Ngabere, and she's been very inspirational, to me as an African woman, but also seeing, how she's led significant efforts within Rwanda and also globally to ensure that, African countries are having, equitable representation and a seat at the table. There's been many different, conferences and forums like the UK AI Safety Summit, the AI Soul Summit, the Paris AI Action Summit, and then also the Africa Summit that happened earlier this year in Rwanda. And so I think we're going to continue to see a lot of progress within Africa, particularly on strengthening this cooperation across between ministers, and just more broadly improving the ICT environment more as well. And so this is some work I published last year, and it was focused on, this data governance reform, and not only focused on like data governance itself, but considering that because AI is impacting so many different industries, African governments alongside with the AU and regional economic communities will have to really work together to improve, these existing regulations in education, labor, particularly because we've seen the impact of AI on labor within African countries, and just ensuring that there are, fewer gaps or regulatory gaps, that AI can, let's say, make loopholes for, or, try to, I would say, evade. And so some work that I published last year with the UN Office on Special Affairs in Africa, I'm focused on the rice data governance framework. And this is also, just continuing my idea of this data governance reform to focus on actions that AU member states can take to operationalize this data governance more effectively. And so in lieu, of, these functional continental frameworks, I believe that countries, regional, and continental bodies should focus on reforming existing data regulation and also implementing the sectoral policy reformation, which I mentioned previously, and then also really improve these collaborations with civil society and academic organizations to improve the integration of the policies. Next, increase regional and continental cooperation. And then finally, strengthen the enforcement of reformed data regulation. To conclude, we see that, African countries are grappling with the potential benefits of AI, and cautious approaches to building, implementing, and governing these technologies are needed. AI should not be seen as a panacea or a band-aid or, the final solution for solving, these development problems. There should be equitable investment by countries to build capacity for these traditional social services, and while making efforts towards building sustainable AI ecosystems. So again, these social problems should not be neglected in favor of trying to advance development and research in AI. To work towards these goals, countries in Africa should continue participating in international collaboration and partnerships, and also leverage the existing expertise within their countries. The ability of Africa to advance innovation despite existing challenges will help define its role in international cooperation as the world continues to transition into a digital future. Thanks so much for your time today, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Chinasa, for a really wide-ranging, fascinating perspective on this landscape, which I think is really hard for many of us to keep up with. You know, we're working in so many domains with technology and governance and policy. It's great to have this kind of overview of what's going on. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, are there any questions from anybody?
Hello, I can ask a question.
Oh,
Jonathan. Thank you,
Yes,
Chinasa.
hi.
Hello.
Hi, everyone, and hi, Chinasa. Nice to see you all, and thank you for joining the call. My name is Jantina. I direct the ethics lab at UCT. I liked your presentation, and there's lots to think about. I think I mean, this isn't necessarily a critique, but in addition to your analysis, which is that none of the evidence that you submitted is accidental, right? All of it is historical, and due to a global history that hasn't really properly been reckoned with. So we haven't spoken about restorative justice and for instance. Now, the perpetuation of these global patterns and imbalances is also not accidental, right? This is exactly what the entire body of work on data colonialism points towards: is that these inequalities are not and will not be addressed by changes in technology. At least, I mean, they will not full stop. But what is really important there is to recognize that they're intentional, right? They are, the world as it is and is the way that it is because there are vested interests that don't want things to be different. And so that broader analysis, so for instance, it's not up to African countries it's not up to African countries, but it's also not even maybe possible for African countries to make up the gap, right? Because the gap itself is a result of ongoing political and historical consequences. And we see that not yet in the space of AI, but we saw that, for instance, very clearly during COVID. And so that broader kind of positioning these inequalities in that broader debate, in that broader context, I think is very important. And I wonder what you have to say about that. I mean, you're nodding, so you know that too. But I think I wonder what bringing that into focus in a discussion of this kind, what that would do for how we think about governance and so on and so forth. I've got more to say as well, but that maybe is a first little provocation.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, you know, and also I know, you know, of your work and that you're much more experienced in this respective domain than me. And I think that I've done a bit of work with some co-authors on AI benefit sharing. And this is also a concept that's become a bit more prominent over the past, I would say, year or so, to really focus on distributing the benefits from tech companies and also these like frontier AI powers, you know, to help, you know, engage in these AI capacity building efforts within majority countries, global majority countries. And I think like this is a great first step. I don't think it seems to be more focused on like the financial benefits of AI and like distributing that versus actually distributing the power in AI, which is something, you know, which is like still very different. And so I think there has to be, you know, better mechanisms that, I guess, like fully, I guess, democratize, you know, like AI development and just like research more broadly. I think that honestly that there is very little incentive from countries like the US and China to do so. Aside from, you know, I would say like actually building alliances. I have a paper coming out that shows that, you know, like this, you know, general, you know, development aid has, you know, been used as a power play for increasing alliances and also just entrenching like these power differentials, but also like we continue to see this played out in like this new era of AI capacity building as well. And so I think like the US is a bit more worried about this because of the influence from China, already on Africa, and then also with Russia, aiming to become a bigger player in AI and specifically aligning with BRICS and China specifically. I think there is a really there's an existing AI race, but also like a AI race for influence within Africa, particularly. I think like a lot of your work will be useful in China in just unpacking this and figuring out will we continue to see these just like issues around neocolonialism continue to be entrenched in AI development, which I think will honestly just happen because there's just been a lot of advances. The gap in AI advances is still really wide, between China, the US, and also just like the rest of the world. And so unfortunately, this will create like a resulting hierarchy that will continue to play out. So yeah.
Tara.
Thank you. You've given us a lot to think about, Chinasa. I had thoughts and comments in a number of areas, but I'll focus on just one or two. First, with AI adoption, I think we talk about it at a couple of different levels. We have the research and the development, and then we have the use, and we have the policy and the governance. But given all of the constraints around digital infrastructure and digital capability in the general population, I worry that we're going to have a greater gap given the prevalence of disinformation already and the way that AI is being used to worsen that we may simply not be able to overcome that gap in understanding and trust in any information that is created by authorities or using AI. What, if any, thoughts, recommendations do you have on starting to try to overcome that trust gap? There's so little trust in across African countries between populations and the government for many good reasons. So that was one, and then the second is more of a global governance question, and that is on increasing collaboration. The BRICS came out with their statement in July of this year. The BRICS, of course, includes China, but it does represent a broader, excuse me, I can't speak today, a broader global majority coalition. With the UN announcing today, the global dialogue on AI, I think that there's a continuing but narrowing opportunity for Africa and the BRICS and other global majority countries to really try to direct that conversation at the UN in order to keep the aperture open for more viewpoints and more needs. I guess that's more of a comment than a question, but that's an area that I'm also very interested in following. Over.
Yeah. Could you restate the question for the first one?
That was regarding just the basic trust gap between citizens and governments and about the information that exists in the ecosphere. Like how I struggle to see how we're going to overcome that trust gap.
So, I mentioned, sometimes I actually think that AI would actually be very useful in helping stem corruption in many African countries. But I think this is maybe a good reason why many African governments would not want to adopt AI for that specific use case. There are a lots of organizations I follow, particularly in Nigeria, like Budget and also Traka, and they actually physically go and track the progress of government-funded projects and contracted projects as well. They've started to use AI in their processes, and I think that it's been really helpful just in public trust because they post frequently on Twitter, and I'm sure they have other platforms they post on too. And so I think and again I mentioned that they leverage AI in these processes. I'm sure that there are other organizations across the continent doing similar things, and I think that. Just publicly, being able to view this kind of, work is something that, more so improves accountability, not necessarily trust, because I think a lot of the projects I see posted, have not been completed properly or even started at all. And so I think that, again, like trust, it doesn't necessarily improve my trust, but I'm glad to see that there are people tracking this. But again, I think it's, again, there are many fundamental issues that also African governments will have to focus on outside of AI and just, improving like governance more broadly. And I think that there are many issues that, let's see, AI is not a solution for it because very basic, government reforms will actually have a better impact than trying to like introduce AI. So for example, building more hospitals, funding more nurses, doctors, funding more teachers, rather than trying to, let's say, like build in AI or introduce AI chatbots in these respective domains. So that's what I think for that first question. For the second one, very interesting. Again, I mentioned that, Russia, despite the sanctions and just the general like ostracization, is, slowly, sneaking in, their way to be a bit more influential in this respect of like international AI cooperation games. China has also like led a lot of efforts, particularly within the UN, on like the capacity building effort for AI. And so we see that they have also specifically the ministers and even, the president has been very intentional about mentioning that they want to help global majority countries to improve AI capacity, also building upon, a lot of the efforts from the BRI, the Belt Road Initiative, and then also, that has many digital aspects included in it as well. So I think that again, we'll continue to see these two countries, increase their influence. Unfortunately, like I think it's a bit bad for the US, because they have stepped back from this international cooperation at a very like vital time. And this has also had a very big impact on some like other development funders too. And so I think there has to be like caution from African governments and just understanding like, their alignment tactics, and then also, ensuring that they still have their needs prioritized, and not, are not, let's say, like accepting deals, for, the building of an AI compute cluster or the establishment of like a AI research exchange program, in exchange for things that don't necessarily align with their values. So those are some of the things I'm thinking about in that aspect.
Cool, thank you. There were a couple of questions also from Ibrahim in the chat. The first one was, of the 220 plus AI startups in Africa, how many received funds from internal sources of their countries as compared to external funding? And the second question there is about digital illiteracy. And so the question is, how do you see African countries overcoming this gap while also ensuring governments don't just import AI systems trained elsewhere, which often don't fit our realities?
Yeah, so I don't have the best, for the first question, I don't have the answer to that, but I personally am familiar with the just general investing ecosystem in Africa. And so I know that it's about a mix, honestly. There are, very big and prominent funders within the continent, particularly, again, within these, hub countries, so Nigeria, Egypt, Kenya, South Africa. There is a little bit of involvement. I mean, like there are some companies that, participate in prominent accelerators like Y Combinator, but it's not that common, honestly. So I would say most of the funding tends to come from African funders, but again, like these funders, raise money from other entities. And so, when you're trying to track that provenance, it actually becomes a bit hard to understand, like, is it truly, like fully African money that is funding these companies versus, just like African venture capitalists being just the face of it. So I think like this is something I would just recommend like personal research into. I'm also sharing the link for the startup list document or picture that I shared. So when it comes to your other questions, I see the digital literacy. I think, yeah, there's a lot of civil society organizations, focused on improving, these efforts. There are, a lot of fact-checking organizations that are focused on like media and literacy training for journalists, which I think is also great. Improving, the narratives around AI, because I think that like right now we have an issue where like AI is overhyped and, people reading these articles and just, different posts about these technologies can be very influenced by what is promoted in the media. And so I think there's an effort needed by, journalists to accurately convey the abilities and limitations of AI, and then also for the government to help with addressing, these disinformation campaigns, like I mentioned previously, and then also again for citizens themselves to be enabled to seek, these upskilling and literacy programs. And then I think in terms of ensuring governments don't just import AI systems, I mean, right now, this is also hard because, the world primarily runs on like three different cloud computing services from basically three companies, Amazon, Google, and Microsoft. I know in Africa, the landscape is a bit more diverse, but it's still, I would say there's a big concentration, of these companies, in the African tech system, tech ecosystem. And so I think that's also because these, providers of these cloud computing services also have, AI services. I think it becomes like very intertwined as well. And so this importation, kind of happens by default if your country, is using AWS for their servers, for example. And so I think that, promoting education, promoting, development of, let's say AI innovation. I think also supporting these local telecommunications companies. I know that like MTN, for example, has, started, building these AI specific computing centers and clusters. And so I think that, and also, the AI factory from Cassava Technologies, from Strive Masiwa. So I think like, there has to be more effort to just focus on this local innovation. And then for the last question, governance measures for supporting digital capacity building and context appropriate AI adoption. Yeah, very tough question. I don't have the best answer right now, honestly. I think that again, like, I mentioned education a lot, excuse me, because like I think it's really just like the key, to building up, like AI innovation ecosystems, and also because like, you can probably tell by my accent, even though I'm Nigerian, I was born and raised in the U.S. and have gone through the higher education ecosystem in the U.S. and know that like academic AI research was fundamental. And just academic like research is fundamental to many like tech advancements over the past like basically century. And so I think like this will also, if Africa can like replicate this model, I think we'll continue to see a lot of success that will also translate, into like, startups as well, because a lot of academics, have built very prominent startups or lead, prominent AI startups as well, or companies, excuse me. And so I think that like education is really key, but also again, providing the enabling environment for innovation, like venture capital startups to thrive, and then also I think just having very strict measures on what kind of AI should be adopted, and I think also because I mentioned surveillance, and I think that a lot of countries honestly like don't need it, and one because these technologies like have really bad predictive rates or like error rates, excuse me. And so that's like my big issue around that. And then they continue to like exacerbate bias in different ways. And so just really having like also these evaluation frameworks and systems that can, find out like the efficacy of these technologies. And then also ensure that, like a NIST, for example, a NIST is a standards institute for the United States government. I think having more of those within Africa, particularly, African countries, excuse me, will actually be very helpful in helping improve this context appropriate AI adoption. So very long answer, but thank you for the questions. Yeah.
Thanks. So we have a couple of minutes left. Jantine, it sounded like you had more you wanted to add there. Do you want to add anything in the last couple of minutes? Any last questions?
I feel like I would like to be in a seminar room with Chinasa and sharing thoughts and experiences and ideas, because there's lots of ideas and responses coming up for me in response to everything that you're feeding. So Chinasa,
Yes,
very interesting work, and you share a really interesting perspective. I think what I'm struggling with, and I certainly don't have the answer, but what I'm struggling with and desiring in my own work, and so my work is very situated. I'm in the Faculty of Health Sciences. I'm very experienced in thinking about the intersection between ethics, technology, and health, or ethics, science, and health. And so my work is different from yours in the sense that it's grounded in thinking about the hospital, the clinic, the needs of people, and how we stay healthy. So it's almost a proviso. But in the context of a lot of the work that I do and the engagements, for instance, with Jonathan and others in that AI Institute space that we're trying to develop at UCT, a key question for me is, what is the AI that we need to address some of these really harrowing problems that we face on the African continent, right? So South Africa, as an example, the Western Cape has the highest rate of fetal alcohol syndrome in the world. It's just a fact. There you go. South Africa is home to some of the most murderous cities in the world. South Africa tops the global charts of inequality if you go by Gini coefficient, right? It's one of the most unequal countries in the world that is segregated along the lines of race, class, and gender. There is a rising epidemic of xenophobia, right? Where at the moment we've got organizations, people preventing immigrants from accessing the care that they are entitled to according to our legal framework. Now, a lot of what I hear you say is, we need models and we need policies and we need frameworks, and there's an opportunity to catch up, and there's really exciting stuff happening, and that's all wonderful.
Right.
But if we want AI to work for us, we must make it work to work in this context, in the absence of data, across the digital divide, and to work on the problems that are pressing this society right now. And with this society, I mean South Africa or the continent as a whole.
Yeah.
And so I mean, I know you don't have the answer. I don't have the answer too either. But that matters, and that we need to start the discussion from a slightly different starting point, which is not one of disadvantage, but one of opportunity. I'm even not sure about that, and then to say, well, how do we do things differently, and what legal frameworks and policy frameworks do we need to make that happen? What kind of compute do we need? Where does that compute need to be located? What kind of AI innovation do we actually need to serve the public good, to be in the interest of the common, and so on and so forth. So my starting questions are quite different, and that's just maybe a contribution or something that we can engage more on. The things that come up for me that were also not part of your presentation is the just transitions are clearly really important, right? Because climate change is directly negatively affecting the lives of Africans and African women, right? There's no question about it. It's a direct link. AI guzzles up energy. So we cannot think about a future that has a technological future that does not reckon with questions of sustainability and energy consumption. And justice as part of that. And so again, there's another entry point in this debate, which is about, well, how do we think about AI in the context of the just transitions and solidarity? And then the third kind of element that I think we need to place on the table squarely is critical minerals. And the way that the global geopolitical landscape at the moment is at least partly a response to these big powers trying to consolidate access to the critical minerals that are necessary to drive this revolution, right? So we see China and Taiwan. We see Trump making, proposals to buy Greenland. And we see Russia trying to use the Warner, whatever group, we're no longer the Warner group, but to get a foothold into African countries. And so critical minerals are key. And so it's not just about AI policies, it's also about the industrial policies that we need to make sure that we make AI work for us. And so lots of thought that, so I'm only planting them here because I've enjoyed the presentation and I enjoy your perspective. So
No, yeah, I appreciate your insights as well. And also, like, I mean, we will have an opportunity to speak in person soon. I'll be in Cape Town in end of September, early August. So
Wonderful. Okay.
yeah, engaging more with the the UCT community as well. So yeah, again, I appreciate your insights, and I think it also provides a lot of questions, for me as well.
Wonderful.
Excellent.
Um,
Good.
yeah.
Well,
So
we must make a
yeah,
plan to meet in person then.
Yes, that'd be great.
absolutely. So yeah, Tina, I can discuss with you about those arrangements soon. But yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much, Chinasa, for your insights, for your time. It is hugely appreciated. I think yeah, everybody will have gained some new perspective on this, so I think it's been extremely valuable. So yeah, thank you so much. Chinasa, I don't know if you want to stay on the line, and we can continue with the discussion, the additional discussion we have.
Yep, that's good.
But yeah, let's thank Chinasa again for a wonderful seminar. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you, everyone. I appreciate your time.